Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Ray, and welcome to the RayWenderlich.com podcast. In this podcast, we'll keep you up to date with the latest app development tech talk. Now, here are your hosts, Dru Freeman and Jenn Bailey.
Thanks, Ray. This is the Ray Wenderlich podcast. Welcome to episode 2 for season 9. This episode was recorded on Tuesday, the 2nd of April, 2019. One day shy of Dru attaining level OX33 in his least favorite one-player shooter. I am Jennifer Bailey, here with my fanboying season 9 co-host, Dru Freeman.
Thanks, Jen. On this episode, we have Erica Sadun. Erica is a super experienced developer working on the Mac from the early days, a very early adopter of iOS development. She's a prolific author, having written the iPhone Developer Cookbook, iOS Auto Layout Demystified, Swift Style, Swift Documentation Markup, and so many more. She takes up at least half of one of my shelves in the office. She's also a regular contributor to the Swift Evolution project, having submitted many proposals, and I have a question for her on that in a moment. She holds a PhD in computer science from Georgia Tech's renowned Graphic Visualization Usability Center, and of course, don't miss her popular blog, ericasadun.com, where technology meets something or other.
In this episode, we're going to discuss style. Specifically, Erica is going to take us through her 5 strings, and then later Dru talks about his project woes over his desire for the perfect UI elements. Erica, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. What a thrill to be on the podcast.
We are absolutely thrilled to have you here. As I said, I am personally fanboying because, well, first of all, the first time I came in contact with you was through something called Erica's Tools. And if I remember correctly, that was one of the earliest entries I found to jailbreaking around iOS 3, was it? Is that correct?
No, it was iOS 1.
It was iOS 1. Well, I always consider iOS 1, go write a web page and you're done.
Yeah, this was in iOS 1. It was about 2 months after iOS, it wasn't called iOS, it was iPhone OS. Mm-hmm. The iPhone was released, and when was it released? June or July?
Probably June, because I think it was with the WWDC. No, it was a separate event, wasn't it?
It was announced in January at Macworld. Right. And then June-ish, let's call it June-ish. June-ish is about as accurate as we really need. Mm-hmm. Around then, the iPhone came out. And then the jailbreaking stuff started happening. I had nothing to do with that. I was sort of a passenger on the jailbreak train. And one of the developers came up with what was an ARM toolchain, ARM being the processor that the iPhone runs on. And that was the middle of that summer. So it was not much more than, I would say, a month and a half after the iPhone came out. And so we had access at that point to creating very, very simple applications and command line tools. So even though I started off with a few things that were apps first, my first apps were monitoring processes and running some predefined lines of code. I always loved the command line. I still love the command line. And so I was writing a lot of just little utilities. And I had no idea how to host them. At that point, people were starting to put together package managers, and there was something called Installer. And then after that was Kydia, which really should be pronounced Cydia, but fortunately, Jay...
I always thought it was Cydia.
Yeah, but Jay says no. And there's a reason, which is it's named after the apple worm. It's named after an actual creature. And so I believe it's Kydia, but nobody calls it that. It was Cydia. And it was an application package manager based on, a Linux APK sort of thing. apt-get, I think, was how you accessed it. And so I managed to convince some people to host my stuff because I didn't have a website and I didn't know how to do it, but I did know how to write some simple utilities. So things that were missing that were just helpful in getting things accomplished, I would just put into these tiny, tiny little applets and, kind of gather them up into something called Erica's Utilities.
Wow.
And so, and from that point on, anybody who found anything on Jailbreaking, they tell you to go to Kydia. Like I said, I always thought it was Cydia. And then they'd say, and the first thing you want
Just
to download,
Cydia.
the first thing you want to download is Erica's Utilities and Tools, because that will get you started. And that was pretty much our first look at what would be iOS. We got to see some of the UI kit classes and the like.
Well, at that point, what I was doing was I was going through the frameworks and basically dumping the frameworks and reading through them. And I know this is a weird kind of obsessive kind of hobby, but I enjoyed it. And I started learning how the system was put together and how to make apps and how to create them. And so I started building apps after that. Some, apps that were, they tended towards a very simple, very prosaic, but things that I really needed to do.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that was just file management. But I do remember someone coming to me and they said, at this point, people will install anything, absolutely anything. All you have to do is put something out and people will install it. And so he asked me to write an app. He said, write an absolute nonsense app. And we're going to put it out with a nonsense description on installer, because it was still installer at that point. And so I wrote an app that amused my children, which consisted of a little button. And you try to tap the button, but when you put your finger there, the button would run away. And occasionally it would turn into a fish.
I remember this app.
And it was called Magenta. And I think this is the first time I'm actually taking authorship, admitting authorship of Magenta. But I loved it. Because, you tap it. Oh, and it would mock you as well. The app would mock you. And so you couldn't tap on the button. You would put your finger there. The button would, I used some algorithms to make sure that the button was absolutely untappable, occasionally turned into a fish, and, it would mock you. Just because the brief I was given was make a ridiculous app. So I made this ridiculous app and we started looking at how many people were downloading it. Now, we're nowhere near where we are today in the ecosystem because the phone was expensive. People were still waiting for it. Relatively few people jailbroke it compared to the larger community of people who had purchased it. But hundreds and hundreds and then thousands and thousands of people started downloading this nonsensical app, nonsensical name. And I would love for you guys, if you have access to a Google search, to search for Magenta iPhone and see if you could find some of the discussions that went on between people trying to figure out what exactly this app was.
Unfortunately, all you're going to get right now is wallpaper and case. I have to probably throw in Jailbreak to see if that'll get it.
Maybe installer?
There are people still trying to jailbreak, even under iOS 12. No.
Oh, yes, there are.
I had thought that the jailbreaking was slowly fading into obscurity.
It mostly has faded into obscurity because it's a pain.
Well, Apple keep closing up all of the loopholes to get you in there.
Yeah, they do. it's a philosophy thing. People like to have control over their systems, but on the other hand, people like to have safety, security. They like to have the ability to upgrade whenever they need to. It's the same thing that happened to the Hackintosh community. On the one hand, it was glorious being able to install Mac OS or OS 10 as it was on a system that really fit you better. The Dell little mini Inspiron, I think they were called, these tiny netbooks. I had like 4 of them. My kids went through them. They were in part of our family for years, the perfect form factor, and they just aged out. But you couldn't upgrade them. You ran into those walls. And even though when you purchase a Mac, this does have a life limitation, you eventually will age out. You age out more slowly. And right now, I'm going into a work situation where I am going to be needing to work on a MacBook Pro. And I have teeny tiny hands, and the MacBook Pro keyboard is terrible. I mean, it's for big guys. It's for, people who can reach, and it feels terrible. I love mechanical keyboards. And so what I'm going to be doing is connecting it to monitors, connecting it to a mechanical keyboard. There is no reason for me to be having a laptop. If I could have something like an Apple TV running Mac OS, that would be perfect for me, especially lightweight and portable, because the Mac Mini, as much as I love it, is not that portable. But I would love to be able to have something that I could just grab, hook in a few wires, I'm good to go. And then be able to take it here and there. And
with my MacBook Pro, it's all docks and cables. I don't even use the keyboard, and I feel badly because I enjoy the touch bar, but it's a toy. I have my other keyboard and mouse and super trackpad, whatever they call it, this iteration, and I barely even touch the actual unit itself.
What I want to be able to do is basically have an iPad and use it as an iPad. And this is never going to happen, by the way, because I'm going back to the mindset of the Mac Duo. Do you remember the Duo?
The Duo Dock?
The Duo Dock, which would allow you to take a device and move it from work to home to, in theory, the coffee shop. Not that they had really coffee shops back then, but there was a time before Starbucks. But what I want to be able to do is take my world with me and be able to work at the coffee shop and not have to use that horrible screen and I know the screen is beautiful, but I can't see the screen because I'm nearly blind. And I can't use the keyboard because my hands are too small. And then I'm always resting my forearms on the trackpad. And it's a constant misery. I hate using laptops. Laptops are just not working for me. I've got to say those old little Dell ones worked pretty well for me, but it's a different time of my life and so forth. The current MacBooks don't.
Even the Air seems to have that problem where you've still got a lot of real estate for the trackpad on the Air, so you're still making a large reach for it. I admit I have slightly larger hands, but I'm using the Bluetooth keyboard, which is just the keyboard by itself, so I don't have to reach over anything. I keep the trackpad off to my right.
Mm-hmm. And we now are in an age of very cheap screens.
Mm-hmm.
And the screens are becoming lighter, more portable, bigger, better resolution. And soon they're going to become folding, and they maybe become rollable. And
I when I was young, I had an Apple II, and I would actually, for places that I was teaching classes as a kid, I would drag along my Apple II and my television set. And that was a nightmare. And to say television set alone should be an indicator to anybody over the age of 35 of how big a behemoth a portable TV that was about 14 inches was. It was a huge monster of a box.
I find that I'm so fussy in my computing needs. I have everything customized for me, especially in Xcode. And in fact, all of Finder, everything in Finder uses Emacs key equivalents for me. And so if I go to somebody else's machine, it's like I put it on mittens trying to get anything accomplished.
Mm-hmm.
That level of customization makes me incredibly effective when I'm doing work on my home system. And it makes me incredibly hopeless when I need to go to other people's systems.
Whenever I'm on a call with a colleague and the colleague's like, can I type? I'm like, you're going to want me to drive. You don't want to try to drive this car. I've got all the customizations, but I want to continue to go through this train with you. But I want to also ask you a question, because one of the things that we said was that you are a regular contributor to the Swift Evolution project. And I know this, I've seen many of your contributions, but now I've been told this, and I just want to verify that you've actually had more proposals refused than anybody else has actually submitted.
I don't know if that's true. In fact, I doubt strongly that's true, but I am the #1 submitter of rejected proposals. And I'm extremely proud of that.
Well, I mean, you haven't given them an idea. That's a great thing. I mean, that's all the way back to Mythbusters. Failure is always an option. At least, you know, the only bad question is the unasked one.
In some cases, we needed to settle things. Things, you know, they would come up, fine, let's just vote on it, and it's done. So there are a few of those. And then there are those that are extremely good ideas that people just do not have the right attitude to see. So let me give you an example. One of the things I proposed was to allow dangling commas in call sites and functional declarations. So you might say, why would you want that? That's ridiculous. Or as Chris Latner put it, it was an abomination in his work.
I'm glad Chris didn't sugarcoat it.
Oh, no, that was him sugarcoating it. That was him being nice about it. Because it's ugly. And I don't care, because Swift is a heavily defaulted parameter language. And when you have a heavily defaulted parameter language, there are times you're going to comment in things and out. So think about this. You have something and you're sending a parameter, and then you decide, I want to actually go just use the default. So what you do is you comment it out, and then your commas no longer work. So you have to do another change. And that means your change differences, you know, in your Git, because everybody uses Git. I mean, I actually do use SVN sometimes, but pretty much everybody uses Git. You go and look at your Git diffs. And you have now made 2 changes, possibly 3, for this one single point. And you should not have to do that. You should be able to change things and adapt things and so forth with a single point of change. And including them would follow what is already there in collections. If you have an array, you can use dangling commas for exactly those reasons. If you have a dictionary or a set, you can use dangling commas for exactly these reasons. If these reasons are valid for these use cases, they should be valid for all expressions and for parameters in call sites and declarations. So I am very proud of that rejection.
That one has been rejected.
Oh yeah, it's dead. However, there's kind of some buzz that it might be reevaluated. I'm not holding my breath. And if so, I would definitely want them to take that to the greatest maximum, not just the use case of call site and parameter declaration. I would want it to be there for pretty much any expression.
If there's a comma, it can dangle.
Yes. Except at church or, you can
So
cut that part out.
This pretty much takes us into the main topic, which is discussing style. And I had your Swift style book, the first edition. And now, when did the second edition release?
2 days ago, 3 days ago, something like that. Really recently. Of course, we're recording this in April. People are not going to hear this until when?
Actually, about 2 weeks. We've bumped this episode, so it'll be about 3 or 4 weeks. You're episode 2 now, not episode 10, or you're still episode 10 if you're counting in binary. We decided that it was best to have the show run sooner rather than all the way after WWDC, when all of a sudden everything we've been talking about has changed.
How wonderful. Oh, everybody listen, my book is brand new. It's fresh. It's hot off the shelf. It still has that new bread smell.
I've got it in my...
There's been no WWDC. It's still all relevant. We're not going to get destroyed with all our new stuff for at least 4 months.
Now, I should be really clear that very little changed in the book between the first edition and the second edition. I really just kind of refreshed it, made the Swift just look a little bit more modern because the language has moved. But the recommendations haven't, for the most part, changed.
Of course, we're going to have the link to the book in the show notes, but can you give us a couple of specific high points so that people can understand why this is like a fantastic book, other than the fact that you wrote it, it's out, etc. But let people get a little bit of a taste of some of the high points of what makes some of the things to touch on from Swift style.
The thing I always say about style is that when you write code, you're not just writing to the compiler. Your code, you're writing to yourself. You're writing to your future self. You are writing to everybody in your team. You're writing to the maintainers of the code. You're writing to people who are referencing your code to figure out how you did things. You're writing to a greater and wider community. And as I said, don't forget that future you is an idiot.
It's all right. Past me is an idiot too.
Well, that's true too. I always get furious at past me because past me didn't do it right. And then future me has to figure it out. And what style does is it lowers the effort it takes to think about what you're looking at in code. If you're in, some sort of, computer science sort of mode, you'll say it will lower the cognitive burden of understanding what's going on. And if you're talking to real people, what you say is it makes it clear and understandable and maintainable. And it's really important.
I have to admit, as a developer, I've looked back and gone, what was I thinking? And the one excuse that I've always used is, well, it seemed like a good idea at the time, but I do appreciate the approach of, if you try for clarity when you first write it, when you go back, it's not a morass to dig through. It's something that you can at least say, okay, I see what I was thinking. It still was the wrong thing.
When you use consistent code style, it takes some things out of the equation. You no longer have to even think, because you are simply following some rules that you've agreed upon. And so the amount of information, the amount of conflicting and rioting ideas that you have to go through to find the point of what this code is about is reduced. It's like dusting your code. It makes it clean and shiny and allows you just to see what your intentions are. Because code is all about, I hate to use the word codifying because that just means to put into code, but it's about codifying your intentions and taking things out of your brain space and the meat space and putting it into language space. And so code works at, all these different levels. So style can be something simply as, where do you put your commas? How do you do your colons? Do you always use consistent colons? How do you do your braces and so forth? But it can also be, how do you approach things like checking arrays for emptiness? And if in my personal opinion, and this is a very opinionated book. I even made the publisher put down as a subtitle. What is a subtitle? It's something like an opinionated guide to an opinionated language. Something like that.
So,
but I think that if you compare an array to the empty array, as opposed to using the isEmpty property, that you're missing out on a bit of expressiveness. And if you adhere to this every single time, you will never think of it again. Because when you use an unusual construct, or you use constructs that are not the same always every time you do it the same over and over, it's like looking at somebody who has a bit of spinach in their teeth and you're having lunch with them. It's really hard to move past that and listen to those wonderful words of philosophy and wisdom and warmth and love that this person is sharing with you, because you're focused on the wrong thing. And it's, again, like a window. A good style is like looking through a clear window. Wow. And if you use inconsistent style, you're seeing the little specks and sneasel bits and the fingerprints and so forth. You focus on the wrong things, and good style helps you focus on your code instead.
So can I set up an example of a coding issue? And would you be able to give me a rough idea of, let's say, what would be best stylistically along those lines? The example I'm thinking.
My answer, but go ahead, do it.
Oh, no, I am more than prepared. Right now, I'm dealing with code that is meant to run on the watch and the iOS device and the TV device. And at the top of my code, I will often have hash if OS this, else if OS that, else if OS that. Now, what do you feel is the best way to handle code that is, for the most part, let's say 80% going to be the same between all three platforms, but then you've got that 20% carve out? How do you best handle that? Through extensions, through just dealing with those ifs? I'm prepared to not hate your answer.
Because my answer is always the way that you and your team do it is the best way.
I'm sorry, I missed that last part about the code smell.
Your code does not smell. If you're doing it and it works for you and it's consistent, that's all style cares about. Now, I'm going to tell you how to do it from a developer's point of view, because, man, you're doing it all wrong. But I'm telling you, in terms of style, so long as you are consistent, so long as your code is getting the job done and you have adopted certain practices, stick to those practices. Consistency means that you know exactly what to expect. And those have to rise organically from your particular organization. And generally, if you join an organization, you go and adhere to whatever their house style sheet is. You don't go in there and start making waves. The worst thing happens is when somebody takes over a project and they start doing it in a different way. And then another person comes into the project and they start doing it in another different way, and so on and so forth. The more that an organization can have a set of standards across all their code, the better it's going to be, even if you disagree with what those standards are.
Right.
So I disagree with how you've approached it, but damn it, I'm going to support your way of doing it because that is your way of doing it. And go you.
Unfortunately, the flip side of that one is I've entered into far too many companies that have brought me in saying, so you're a Swift expert. What we want you to do is get our standards together. You find out there's 4 or 5 already in use in the code in different ways, and they don't want you to change them.
Yeah, that's a human issue.
Yep.
Touch too.
But what you were asking about for deploying to different platforms, that's really not a style issue. Now, does language have tools to help you do that a little bit better? I think it does, through 2 approaches. The first, of course, is type alias. I love type alias. So most of my cross-platform work, whether I'm working with UI Bezier Path or if I'm using UI font or UI color or NS font or NS color or any of those things, I've written cross-platform versions of them and I use type alias. So I only deal with color. I only deal with font. It doesn't really matter if this particular code gets deployed to one or another. That's a technical solution. The other part of it was a proposal that I also worked on. Well, not also worked on, because I had nothing to do with type aliases. A proposal, in addition to the ones I've already discussed that I worked on. You see, it's very hard to be clear when you're talking about 20 different things. And that's can import. So can import is a new way of doing this. And what you do is, instead of, if you're working with OS 10, which is now aliased to Mac OS, what you do is you say, can I import UIKit? And if you can import UIKit, then you do it in this way or that way. The drawback, of course, where you do have to do the test, is that there is a subset of UIKit on watch. So not everything is available to you. So it's not the absolute ultimate thing, but you can usually get enough clarity in what you can import to deal with those if statements. And I don't have a problem with if statements. If statements, especially when they're very short, and the conditional compilation flags are just saying either you do this or that based on the target that you're compiling to. People do that. That's the reality. It's how you approach developing for multiple platforms and making sure that your code will remain usable across all of them. I'm for that. And if you're doing that with if checks against particular qualities, you can do that. Just be aware that, there's often other things that come into play, such as features that are not available on all targets. So if you're deploying back to, iOS 10, you might not have features there. So your conditionality starts getting a little more complex and a little more complex, and so on and so forth. And as of right now, Swift does not have a macro system that lets you combine all of those or discuss those in a way that isolates them easily. So it can get messy. So be clean. If you use good style, you can get through this.
Wow, there's a lot of insight in there. I like how you define style as the consistency of the code rather than the developer preferences.
I think you need to know that when you pick up a style, there are things people do that just simply horrify me, but they have reasons for doing it. For example, there are people who will declare a variable and then they will put the colon next to the type and tab between the name, the symbol, and the colon. And so it's all kind of aligned with the colon like way over to the right and stuff. It's not my style. Does this make them a bad person? No.
Almost.
Does it work for them? Generally, they have a good reason for why they're doing something as bizarre as that.
Isn't that a holdover from the old Pascal APIs for Mac OS?
Oh, I don't remember. Oh God, that was ages ago. But there are people who put the commas for collections as the first thing on each line.
Okay, ew.
Again, we're not talking about things that are bad. These people are not going to go to hell for doing this. Nobody will arrest them. They will not be taken to the public square and humiliated. They're not doing something that is essentially a bad thing to do. What they're doing is making a choice. They're making a stylistic choice. And in doing that, they weigh up the cost benefit. And when I write the book, okay, there are some things I take a point of view on, like copying, pasting code from C, but there are very few things. Generally, what I want you to know is that what choices you make, it's not about the choices themselves, it's about the application of the choices. Mm-hmm. And in order to develop this book, what I did is I went out and I talked to as many developers as I could. I like listening to developers. I like going and talking, and here I am just talking my mouth off, but I do go and listen, and I look at their code, and I listen to what they're telling me. And this book is less a depiction of me as a developer and my personal opinions, because there are some things that I would normally do a little bit differently than they have, that I have in the book. But it's important. What is the community doing? What consensus has the community come up with? Is it a major consensus? Is it a minor consensus? Is it basically a rule of law? And
I like the fact that in the book that you've got things that say, well, the consensus is this, or the consensus is split. I like the fact that it really sounds like the voice of the crowd and comments on that as well.
And what I try to do is figure out what people are thinking about. When they're doing style, what is it? And then I tried to draw that into the book. And then I did a lot of background research. I had done a lot of cognitive science when I was doing my PhD. So I started pulling out all that stuff as well and trying to tie together to make people understand not just what is it we do to inform our code with style, but why. What benefits do we get? What accrues in terms of using good style? How does it help you and help your organization?
Did you find anything that the general consensus called for that was something that ran counter to just your own personal feelings? And I understand that this is just you personally, but I'm just curious.
Almond bracing.
I'm sorry?
Absolutely love almond bracing. Almond bracing is the habit as opposed to one true bracing. One true brace style puts the opening brace at the end of a line and the closing brace at the start of a line. That's the one true brace style. It's called 1TBS. Almond style always puts the opening brace at the same level as a closing brace, so your eye can travel down. It is a much clearer way of knowing your scope. And the cost of it is that you take up more vertical space, but you're on a computer. Who cares how much vertical space? It may have mattered in the 1970s when you had to print things out on expensive things that it would cost per piece of paper. But I love almond. I think almond is a much superior way of bracing. I do not use almond in my Swift code. I use 1TBS because it is a universal consensus, more or less. I'll call it nearly universal to use it.
Yeah. I was thinking about that because I'm exactly the same way, is that I like the visual of it, but I am just so conditioned, and I don't know if it's just from learning code and learning coding that I'm just so conditioned to do one true rather than almond. But I do visually like it. And I remember when I
fight Xcode every single day.
I'm sorry?
Do you want to fight Xcode every single day? Xcode will autocomplete using one true brace style.
It's true.
It's swimming upstream.
But now, I remember work in Pascal, and I would actually, when I had to print out my printouts, I would use almond for the Pascal because it was easier just to draw lines between the opening and the closing brace to see that block of code visually.
I not only do that, but, I still count my parentheses to see if they line up. You don't have to do that anymore. Xcode takes care of that. But, you count for every opening parenthesis, it's 1, 2, 3, 4. And for every closing one, it's -1. So it's 1, 2, 3, 2, 1, 2, 3, 2. And if you hit 0, you're balanced. But old habits like that aren't needed today, whereas almond still makes the visual presentation clearer of where the scope begins and ends. You know where you are with respect to what has been defined and so forth. So that is one of the things that you asked. Is there anything that you particularly like that, is not a consensus and therefore, all embracing is one of those?
And I think that alone is one of the things that's really exciting about the book, is that a lot of people use these conventions, but I'm pretty sure most of them don't even know they have names. They refer to, I use the brace on the line with if, but they never actually say the one true, or the idea of using type magnetic colons. That these are actually names to explain these things, and having that vocabulary also, I think, takes you up a level as a developer to be able to say, okay, so this is what's going on here, and now I can recognize it for what it is.
I am so happy to learn that name, as when I'm presenting code to beginners, I find it is so much easier for them to understand visually. So I use that teaching beginners.
Finding good words is hard. And a lot of times with projects like this, the developers haven't come up with names, or they use inconsistent names, or the names in the Swift programming language, the main book that you use as a reference, don't necessarily match. So I'm going to give you another example.
Yeah.
It's not a name, but it's a convention, which is the return type of void.
Okay.
So how do you write the return type of void? There are two ways of doing it. The return type void is actually a type alias. If you look it up in the standard library, you'll see that it's a type alias for open parenthesis, close parenthesis. So why don't we just use open parenthesis, close parenthesis instead of using this type alias? And in fact, if you look through Apple's code, although they're now all kind of converging on using the word void instead of that, you'll see that it has been, at least in the past, inconsistently applied. And the reason, oh my gosh, you could use like one of those headlines from one of those, what are those sites called? The ones that want you to click on pictures of cats.
Clickbait?
Clickbait. The clickbait answer. You are going to hate reason number one for why this is done. And the answer is because it's done that way in C.
Oh.
Hey.
So this is where I hope you do use some video parts so that I can get that expression.
Oh, you are blowing my mind in this talk. Wow.
Which is
No idea.
intentionally adopting C-like conventions.
Wow.
It is not by accident. It is intended to be familiar and comfortable for those coming from C-like languages. And of course, what is the C-like language that most of the people coming to Swift are going to be most familiar with?
C.
C.
It is C. A lot of people would have gone for Objective-C, but it is in fact C, because a lot of people are coming in now who haven't had a background in Objective-C. But the goal was to get people from C and Java and other C-ish languages, C++ and so forth, or Objective-C, which is, a proper superset of ANSI, or at least it was last time I checked, and have them be familiar and comfortable in the language. So it feels very C-ish, even to the point where you can put semicolons at the ends of your statements.
Yeah.
So if you met someone, a new developer, not a new developer, but a developer who is new to you, and you looked at their code and you saw that they were using semicolons at the end of their lines, what would you think of them?
I think they were a C programmer.
Yeah. I would think they were new to the language and probably came from Java or C++.
And I think that that's a pretty good read on why most people use the semicolon. And there are few people who will be so insistent that they'll keep using it. There are some, but most people tend to drop it after they become more and more familiar with the language. So that's another way that style plays into this, where style and consistent style does give a sense of how polished and familiar the code is. That's not to say the person coming in from C is not necessarily an expert and may not have insights that are valuable and important and so forth. But when you have things in your code that give that impression, it will make people looking at your code come to conclusions that are not necessarily valid.
Wow. That's so true.
So, given this, let's say that you are in the position where you are asked to set the standards. Do you suggest just following what the consensus has suggested and trying to edit the code as best you can to change it? Or do you suggest leaving the code as it is unless there are just too many diffuse standards existing within it?
This is a people question, not a code question. And I'm going to give you my standard answer, which is code is easy and people are hard.
Oh, I agree.
Wonderful. I may have to actually put that one up on my wall. Erica, the book is fantastic. I'm glad that I've gotten my hands on it. The first edition was fantastic. I'm really going to suggest the second edition for everybody out there. The link will be in the show notes. We're going to take a little bit of a break, and then when we get back, I will talk about my woes trying to figure out how to get my perfect UI element into my project. We'll be back in just one moment. This RayWenderlich.com podcast is brought to you by TripleByte. Applying to programming jobs sucks. You have to put the right keywords in your resume. You spend hours and hours on phone screens, take-home projects, and that's assuming the company even responds to your interest or your cover letters. Well, if you're a software engineer, TripleByte can help.
They work with over 400 top tech companies, from big names like Dropbox and Adobe to exciting startups. You do one brief online interview with them, and if you do well, you get to go straight to the final interviews with the companies on their platform. It's like the common app for software engineers. TripleByte does not look at your resume or where you went to school. All they care about is if you can code.
And I can appreciate that. Being in the industry for 35 years, I'm entirely self-taught. My undergraduate study was in theater, and I left school to do my first job, so I don't carry a bachelor's, no bachelor's of arts, no bachelor's of science, and that's the one thing I'm often trying to hide or misdirect on my resume. With TripleByte, they'd care more about the coding experience that I have and not worry about that one little fact.
Apply now at triplebyte.com/Ray. That's triplebyte.com, byte, BYTE, as in 8 bits. As a special offer for listeners of this show, if you take a job through TripleByte, they'll offer you a $1,000 signing bonus. Welcome back to the Ray Wenderlich podcast, where we're talking with Erica about Swift style, and now we'll kick it over to Dru.
Yeah, I find with this season that we're going back to that format where we're going to have the host each talk about some kind of tech or some kind of developmental experiences they're doing, and that way we can sort of spread things around, and this gives Erica a chance to come in and go, why are you doing that, and give any opinion she may have. I know she doesn't really have much in the way of a lot of strong opinions, God help me for going there, but my current situation in my project is the evils that I consider out of the table view in iOS. It's a wonderful view. I love the delegate pattern. I love the data structure pattern for that. I love putting tables together. The biggest problem that I have with tables, and now with the collection view as well, is paging through large amounts of data. Now in the table view, you do have the section header thumb view that you can use, where you basically see an index of your sections and you can click on them. This works really well for things like songs in iTunes, and it works fairly well for your contacts with alphabetics. But that's where things sort of fall down if you don't have sections that work nice and clearly with the same amount of data within each section. For example, if say you're writing a book viewer, or a document viewer where you have 6 chapters, of which the first chapter is an intro, the second chapter, third chapter, and fourth chapter has a lot of data in it, and then the 6 chapters maybe an index. I think my indexing is off there, but you get the general idea. You don't want to necessarily just click to the beginning of each chapter. Maybe you want to thumb through pages. So what were my options? Well, my options are to either use the section header API, or to add in my own scroller. Aha, scrollers in iOS are only horizontal. And of course, this immediately got me searching online for what I could find, whether it be a third-party scroller extension that I was going to add in, or if it was going to be something similar. And I came across an article from about 2 years ago, maybe 2.5 years ago, and I'll put the link into the show notes from Swift Notions called "The Curious Case of the Missing Vertical Slider." And it of course says, well, there's one of 3 steps. You can basically extend the slider and then do a slider transform, flipping it halfway, but you're not going to necessarily get auto layout that way. You can subclass the UI slider and then flip it sideways with a transform and still not get yourself into your auto layout. Or of course, what's your last option? Roll your own, which everybody always says when you're doing UI, if you're going to try to match something, either do all your own to roll it, or don't try to copy Apple's. So this is where I'm stuck at the moment with that general view of where do I go next? Erica, do you have any general opinions so far?
I have so many thoughts. It's hard to try to put them into order. So let's start with the quick flip on the right, the index, the section index.
Mm-hmm.
It is something that's very old, and I think a lot of developers feel it's very dated.
I could list that for several of the UI control elements nowadays. I don't even want to get into the UI date picker.
Yeah, I get that. Apple needs to reach for some refreshed and fresher UI elements. But I don't think overloading that or even abusing that is necessarily the right way to go. You can imagine things that would do more or less the same idea but put tabs on the right, although on a phone you have very limited horizontal space.
Yeah, you look into the photo app and you try to zoom. Now, I'm a parent. I have a 12-year-old child, which means there's a period of time about 10 years ago where I have about 4,000 photos. And it's not easy to select a photo through a collection view. Mm-hmm. It doesn't actually have the section heads. And I find myself wishing for some of the UI elements that I used to have over in the Mac world. But we discussed offline the idea of that crossover between UI and where it is on iOS and where it may or may not be going on the Mac. And we're going to try to avoid that little mess right now. But the most sane thing that I could come up with was to try to create a vertical-based slider to the left of my table view, which sits on the left side of my interface, that is more of a complete slider to match the scroll. That, of course, introduced its own little problems because if you update the value of the slider when you scroll, you also want to update the scroll when you update the slider, and then you get contention.
And it's not just that. You're talking about in vertical presentation, you're going to take up a significant amount of space because the human finger is going to be about 44 points on a screen that is going to be somewhere 320 points or more.
Mm-hmm.
So you've sacrificed your primary thing, the thing that's the most important to your user, for this relatively less important task. It still may be a very valuable task, but what is the user using this particular application for? And the answer is they are using it to read through the information. So you have to say, who else has looked at this problem and how have they solved it? And we don't want to go look at context. We don't want to look at the music app because those are selections. The entire point of those tables and those controls is to navigate down to a particular selection, which then gets you to what the user's use case is. And the user's use case in there is to listen to music or to call someone, or perhaps do something else with that contact information. When you're dealing with scrolling text, and you are dealing with scrolling text, correct?
Oh, yeah. I basically have a table with lines from a document.
Okay. You have to ask yourself, has Apple done this already? Before you even start looking at new and creative ways to twist your vertical, horizontal slider and deal with the woes of auto layout, which I'm not 100% convinced that it is excluded from auto layout, because I believe that you can tell auto layout your dimensions if you're playing games like that. But leaving the auto layout thing to the side, your consumer is there to look through text, find text, and to quickly move through text if necessary. I would say looking at text is their number one thing they want to do. Who's done it? Where has Apple done it? And they've done it in iBooks or now books. They lost their eye, so they have to squint and make pirate jokes. So how does Apple do it? They do
Table
have a
of
slider.
contents.
It's a horizontal slider, and it's a horizontal slider because they're dealing with the notion of pages. Furthermore, it happens at the bottom of the screen. So you no longer are taking up a major portion of your presentation and cutting away at what the user's interested in. So by transforming from a vertical scroll to a horizontal page flip, you instantly, first, preserve the user's interest, second, allow fast movement, and third, balance the two in a way using Apple-supplied user interface elements. Now, you might say, but that breaks what I was building. But what you're building is not a table view. What you're building is a way to get information in text form to your user. And it doesn't break that.
Now, I actually have two table views that I'm currently dealing with this on, this paging through. One of them is easy to explain by saying it's a book. The other one, the best way to describe it is I have 15 pictures of people effectively voguing, and I need to give the user the impression that they can even swipe through that.
You mean swipe left, swipe right?
No, it's basically a table view with 15 pictures in it.
Okay. And
The Madonna Vogue?
I'm sorry?
Like the Madonna Vogue?
That's the best way to explain it. It's not, but that's the best way to explain it. I have 15 pictures of people standing.
Okay. Let me ask you bunches of questions.
Sure.
What does the user want to do?
Pick one of them to help set a mood for a specific scene.
Okay. Any reason why this is not a horizontal collection view flow?
Room on the page? Well, I guess if it's a horizontal collection view, it doesn't really make it any different from a table view, except for the fact that it's a collection view.
But what you can do is you can just kind of, your count is under 20, correct?
Yes.
Will it always be under 15?
It'll always be the same number. It will never increase.
But do you have an estimate of how many items that you're dealing with?
Yeah, it's about 15 to 20. I don't have the exact number in front of me.
Think of just going through some record albums, cover flow, but vertical, where you kind of get a sense of what's forward and next. You can put in those clues there if you really needed to. Or you could just go left and right until you find the one you like. You can make it feel like you're on a circle that's going around horizontally. There are all sorts of ways to present it without having all those issues that you would, that are entailed with, you know, a standard table view. And that's why Apple introduced the collection view, is to give you that novelty. And if you introduce custom collection flows, well, then you can go even further and turn it like into a gallery and make it feel like you're looking through a set of portraits until you get the style, the theme you want. And by having one on each screen, then you can have additional cues on the screen to lead the user to anticipate what that selection will mean.
Yeah, each picture has its own set of metadata, name, description, etc. So that can always be used as well.
But that's why I was so focused on how many are there. Because if you're going above 20, that's not what you want to do. 20, you're going to want to put, you know, 9 on the screen at a time or 12 on the screen at a time, and then let people kind of pop in and kind of have something come into view, you know, and emphasize it so they can inspect it more closely and then go through 1 or 2 collections. But if you're dealing with under 20, I don't think that that's a hardship to, you know, oh, this is cool, you know, oh, I like this one a little bit more. Okay, I'm going to do this one.
I like that.
Yeah.
You always have to let your user guide you. Your users need empathy with your user. And what your user is trying to accomplish is the most important touch point for any development task. You, as a developer, and I warned you that I would go here, see features and you go, hey, wow, I can add a feature and it will be cool. And let me tell you, your users will not use them or need them or want them unless it's sourced from what they're trying to accomplish. Yep. Users are not impressed by lots and lots of features. Users are impressed with getting to their goal. And every feature you add is something that you end up having to support, because you can never remove it without people throwing a fit. Because that one guy in Michigan, he is going to have a hissy because you removed it, and he's going to give you that 1-star review. Add new features as if they were trying, I don't even have a good metaphor, to take your daughter away. Okay? Give me your daughter. Give me the daughter. No, you're not having her. She's mine. No, you only share that feature with the user if it supports the bottom line of your product. Your product needs to be driven by a vision that empowers your user, and especially when you're working with iOS, because the mindset of the desktop versus the tablet versus the phone versus the watch are all very different things.
Thank you.
Yes. You can do Photoshop on the watch, but God, why would you?
I've tried to explain to people that the watch, that the tablet, that the phone all have their own specific paradigm for either consumptive or creative process, and that each one has its own domain of usage that really defines good things to be done on it and bad things. I enjoy seeing things.
Of usage. It's also the interaction time. And I will apologize in advance, but what is the ideal interaction time for using an app on the iPhone?
It's under 30 seconds, if I remember correctly.
It is basically the duration of a visit to a bathroom.
Really?
That
Wow.
makes perfect sense.
A watch is a glance.
Which is why I thought that the watch was genius, because I was tired of taking my phone out of my pocket to look at the time.
And for time, all you need is a glance.
Mm-hmm.
To read an article, iPhone. To create, iPad. To get work done, serious work, not filling out a form because you're doing an inspection and you are an agent who's, seeing an adjuster or someone, with a wrecked car, because you're filling out a form on an iPad in that case. But if you are
creating a document
or coding or doing things in depth, that's what the desktop gives you. And most people live on the shorter ends of interaction. And when you introduce features, you have to take that time, that interaction time, into account. Every feature has a time associated with it. And your job as a developer is to get your user to accomplish their goal, whether it's playing a game, reading a book, or anything like that, within the interaction time that is allocated to you by the natural space of the device. And with an iPhone, that is a very limited and very narrow few minutes of interaction that you want to make the best possible for that user.
I've actually found that since finally adding an iPad into my cadre of tools, that between the watch and the iPad, I use my iPhone very, very little. I use it predominantly for texting, for phone, for reading emails. Other than that, I really find I don't use my iPhone very much at all.
People take pictures, people scan receipts, people will go and check things. They check in with their phone. They will, believe it or not, actually answer phone calls and talk with people.
Wait, we can use this thing as a phone?
Don't you hate it? Call you on your phone?
Texting.
How dare you turn my iPhone into a phone?
Yeah.
It's really important when you think about texting is that you don't think about the entire conversation.
Mm-hmm.
You think about each text as a single interaction, but by having that history, it gives your user context so that they can use that time really, really efficiently. Time is very compressed when you design any sort of interaction for iOS.
Wow. And when the watch is in the equation, how does the watch relate to, like, context comes to mind? I guess that's not how I meant to word my question, but context seems very important with the watch.
You have to ask, where is the watch doing an amazing job? Where does it just have home runs? Okay?
Apple Pay.
What's that?
Oh, yeah.
Apple Pay.
Apple Pay. Quick, there. You don't reach into your backpack or your back pocket to get the phone. Looking at the time, you just glance at it. You can use it for Siri. One of the things I love is when I'm driving, it will kind of pulse on my wrist when it's time to turn.
That's great. I love the watch for navigation.
It's a little assistant that lets you know, hey, it might be nice if you stood up right now or took a deep breath. A lot of the time with the Apple Watch, the best interactions, you're not looking at it. You're not touching it. You're not doing any of that. It's giving you information. It is coaching you. It is giving you status. It's giving you all those things. And yes, there are the times that you're simply talking into your wrist and feel like an idiot, but it does it in a way that you didn't have to do all those other tasks to find your phone because the phone always slips into your notebook.
I don't feel like an idiot. I feel like Dick Tracy.
I feel like a Star Trek in a way. It's not quite the communicator, but almost.
Yeah. I'll give you that.
Or I think of it as a remote control for my phone sometimes too.
But you think, where would we go next if Apple had no rules, no physics, no laws? Wouldn't you imagine a virtual Siri just following you around, giving you hints and suggestions about things that you're doing next, taking the context of what you're doing, where that zone of interaction actually goes to zero, where it's actually becomes a push system as opposed to a pull, where
Yes.
oh, strawberries are on sale today. And you
Yeah.
like strawberries, and they're low in their fridge.
I can't wait till it's in my field of vision too.
Mhm.
I will say that it does still run the problem that you have to occasionally get onto the phone and tweak the notifications that go to the watch, because I can tell you, I get buzzed every time I pass my local drugstore chain, no matter which drugstore it is. It's like, would you like to get the deal? And I'm like, I need to turn that notification.
Oh my gosh, you have notifications turned on. I didn't know it would even do that. That's horrible.
Well, it's good because I can. I have it turned on because I do check mail for certain accounts.
Uh-huh.
And when I get mail for certain accounts, I need to be able to respond to it immediately sometimes.
But the way it interacts with you through hearing and through touch are really radically changing way we think about computing, because this is another branch of computing. And it excites me. I didn't quite get the watch for a few years. It just really seemed over expensive and kind of pointless. And then I bought one, and now I don't want to live without it.
Yeah.
I wish I was more on the Apple side of things, because I jumped on the Wear OS bandwagon, and that ship is where it's at.
Yeah.
But I love the concept of the watch, so that might prompt me to get an iPhone next.
Mm-hmm.
Even
I've often said that the one thing that Apple creates is ubiquity, in as much as Apple puts something on you and then you suddenly discover, how did I survive without this?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it's at times that's the scariest thing about the company for me, has always been that concept of, how did they fill a niche I didn't even know I had a need to have it filled? And that is, going back to the original topic, that is specifically what motivated the app that I'm working on. What motivates the features that I put into it is it fills voids that I needed. I'm basically writing a Swiss Army knife for an organization I work with. And I always find myself going, I wish there was a shortcut so I didn't have to think about this or do the paperwork or jot this down. And everything is always broken down for me into, what is the quick glance? What is the one thing I need to do in a split second without thinking about it? And that's what moved to the watch. What do I need to be able to jot down a note or see a quick alert or get some status? And that's on the phone. And that has been what's driven it, is that concept of filling a need.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I have fallen in love with in the last couple of weeks, and it's fairly recent because I have not been using the watch for long, is that I love ebooks. I just absolutely love ebooks. And there's this app called VoiceStream. What it is text to speech. And they released very recently a version of it that will allow you to send it to your watch, so that, if you have your headphones on, you can be completely without your phone. You don't have to have your phone with you. You don't even have to have, I have just a normal watch. I don't have Wi-Fi or cell service on it. It's just a basic watch. And I can be walking and listening to a book, or I could be listening to Audible and hear a real one. It's not text to speech. It's just, if I own it on Audible, the price difference is quite,
I prefer Big Finish myself.
On an iPad is just wonderful. Tablets are great for reading. Listening on Audible on the watch is superb. The iPhone is just terrible for large quantities of text. And I apologize for that judgmenty sort of thing, but it really is. It is good for light scanning, reading a quick article, but for going through heavy duty text, you are fighting that text to get that on the iPhone. And I was so happy that this particular app made the jump to the watch, because I can leave the watch or I can leave the phone in the locker and have everything on my watch. All I have are my headphones in the watch, and I'm running or I'm doing the steps thing. The steps thing is really hard. Who invented the steps thing? Some absolute psychopath of a sadist came up with this. I don't get it. It's not as bad as the elliptical, but still, I can do all that, and I've got this entire world on my wrist that I take with me, and that makes me very happy. And when an app of any kind connects with you as a user, then that app has really just hit a home run. And that is what you as developers are trying to do, is hit that home run and connect with that user and change that user's life in such a positive way that they then go on to, some sort of podcast and go, oh, you got to hear about this app.
Because that's the win. Getting your app promoted on a podcast.
Yes.
Or your really wonderful book.
Yeah.
I don't advise people to go into writing. You'll be sorry if you do. I do it because I love it, but it's much harder than app development, I promise you. But when I see people connect to it, and when it does give them insights and makes them excited, that there's no greater joy.
Wow, I love your teaching style, so I cannot wait to dig into the latest book and read more about style.
Erica, so much of the stuff that you've said today is just so valuable. I cannot enough recommend your book to the people who are listening or watching on YouTube this time around. I really appreciate so much that you've come on the show to we're able to give your opinion, and wherever to try to mute your opinion. But I have been a fan of yours for so long, from your books, from meeting you in person, that it has just been an absolute treasure and an honor to have you on the show. And I really thank you for making the time to join us.
It is such a pleasure to be able to be here with you guys. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Erica.
That's going to wrap things up for episode 2 for season 9 of the Ray Wenderlich podcast. We will be back in 2 weeks, and we are bringing in Pete Steinberger, who likes to say that he makes iOS apps that he defines as lickable. He is the developer of the PS PDF kit, and we're looking forward to speaking with him in 2 weeks. Until then, we throw things back to the Emerald Castle. Ray, back to you.
And that's a wrap. Thanks again, everybody, for listening to the RayWenderlich.com podcast. We hope you enjoyed it, and don't forget to leave a rating on iTunes. See you next time.